Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're still letting some people in through the lobby, but we're about 2:04, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name's Karen de Blasio. I'm in the SNAPS office here at HUD headquarters. We're excited to see so many people registered and joining us for today's webinar. These are office hours essentially for ESG-CV Closeout or CARES Act Closeout. So we're going to be hearing from quite a few people today. We have a lot of experts that will be presenting to you will be giving you a lot of really great advice on closing out your grant, your CARES Act grant. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this. Everybody will be on mute the entire time except for the presenters. We are recording this, so the slide deck, the recording of this webinar, and the chat content will be shared and posted on the HUD Exchange. So we will, that should be probably sometime, I would say with the holiday, probably mid to late week next week. We have to run it through compliance and things, so it takes a little bit of time for us to get it posted. Again, everybody's is muted. Please ask questions in the chat. I will say that there's probably going to be a lot of questions. We will not most likely get to every single question. We will do our best. We have time at the end for Q&A. We will go over some of the questions that we're seeing asked in the chat. If your question is not answered during the call today, there will be some links for you to follow and some places on the AAQ and places where you can ask the question if we're not able to answer it in the chat. I will say that this webinar is intended for ESG, Emergency Solutions Grants recipients. These are the entities that HUD has a grant agreement with for the CARES Act allocation back from 2020. Anybody is welcome to listen, but this content is really geared towards the recipient, the grant holder with HUD, because that is the entity that is ultimately responsible for closing out the CARES Act grant. So again, put the questions in the chat. We will do our best to answer them. I will say we will not be able to get to very individualized, nuanced questions. If you put something in the chat and it's very specific to your community about a correction that you need in IDIS or something like that, go ahead and just put it in the AAQ, because it's very hard to try to answer those. Usually we need a little bit more information or more detail. Next slide, please. With that said, I'll just go over very quickly who's presenting. As I said, I'm Karen de Blasio. I'm in the SNAPS office. Sharon Price Singer may be able to join us. She had a conflict, so she's also works with me in the SNAPS office. She may be able to join later on in the afternoon. I also have Heidi Schilp, who's with one of our national technical assistance providers, and she is our IDIS expert. Nora Lally is with Homebase, and she's an expert. She actually helped produce, do these slides, and she did this webinar for those of you that tuned in last year. I think it was about a year ago. And she's, again, one of our national TA providers. And Michelle Budzik with the Partnership Center, who is, again, another expert. She has works for the company that created Sage, and many of you have probably had conversations with Michelle around Sage QPR reporting for ESG. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of what you'll be hearing from us today, we're going to give an overview of the CARES Act or the ESG-CV closeout process. As I said, we have folks here presenting that are experts in IDIS, experts in Sage. So we will review the IDIS closeout requirements. We'll also review the Sage closeout requirements. And we do have slides at the end that highlight a lot of closeout resources that are posted. And then we'll try to respond to as many questions as we can, as you guys put them in the chat. I will say again, the slide deck will be posted, sorry. But a lot of what we're talking about, these are resources that are on the HUD Exchange, that have been on the HUD Exchange. So some of it may look familiar to you all, but I just want to make sure that we've already posted, really, I guess, about a year ago after we did this first webinar, we posted a lot of resources around closing out, both in Sage, closing your projects out, and also closing out the grant, what to do in IDIS, all of that. So there are a lot of resources, and we'll have those links for you all at the end. So next slide, please. So the first kind of section that we're going to review with you is just the overall, the ESG-CV closeout, the timing and the process. And I'm going to hand it over to Nora to talk you guys through that.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone. We all know that with ESG-CV, there were a lot of dates depending on the different allocation of the funding. So just to put us all in the proper ESG-CV headspace, want to spend just a little bit of time reviewing those expenditure and reporting deadlines for those different allocations of funding. So if you were one of the ESG-CV recipients that did not receive any of the reallocated funding, your last day to draw funds was April 30th, 2024, and your final report was due to be submitted at the end of July. So July 31st, 2024 was the deadline for your final report. If you haven't submitted it yet, this is your reminder call that that report is overdue, and we ask you to please submit it as soon as possible. If you did receive reallocated funding, then the funding from ESG-CV rounds 1 and 2, that had the same expenditure deadlines as all of round 1 and 2 funding. So it had the same funding deadline, the same expenditure deadline of April 30th, and the same reporting deadline at the end of July. Only reallocated funding should be being spent through June of 2024, and you have until October 31st, 2024 to draw all reallocated funds, and your final report is due no later than January 31st, 2024. So just a little refresher on what all of those dates are, and we know it can get complicated and confusing depending on the different funding sources, but I think this chart is a pretty handy way to look at, okay, which funding source am I talking about? When was my last day to draw? When was my report due? And just kind of use this as a little check-in with your operations to make sure all of these things have happened. What we want to talk about today, because like Karen mentioned, about a year ago, we spent a lot of quality time going through really like step-by-step of getting ready for ESG-CV closeout and the closeout process. Some of those steps are just HUD things. Some of when a grant gets closed out, there's certain things that all federal grants have to do. So we really went through the entire process. What we want to do today, though, is spend some time on some of the aspects that are really related to the HUD systems and some areas where we're seeing recipients struggle with either understanding what the requirements are or just kind of getting all of the work done in the right way necessary to close out. So we want to talk about today some critical steps in the ESG-CV closeout process. The first one's going to be making sure that your activities are complete and funds have been drawn from IDIS, from the Integrated Disbursement Information System. Then we're going to talk about how to make sure that the financial information between your reporting system, which is Sage, and the financial system, which is IDIS, that the expenditures and the draws are balanced and in the right budget line items. Want to talk about making sure that Sage reporting is complete, and then talk a little bit about the HUD closeout forms, like what the actual steps are within the entire closeout process and what that's going to look like. So that's a little bit more of the specifics that we're going to get to, and to go, even as you can see, we're going like from high level to like mid level. Now we're going to get like into the nitty gritty details. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to start with some of the more detailed conversation.
Perfect. Nora, thank you so much. And thank you for telling everyone what IDIS stands for, so I don't have to. Good afternoon, good day if you're still in the morning. Happy Tuesday to everyone. When we start talking about IDIS, we're not really going to go down into the weeds of all of the things that you need to do in IDIS, because really we're going to focus on the financial information. If you do not use IDIS, it is not the system where you're going to include your beneficiary information, your client level data, your reporting information. We are really talking about finances in IDIS. This is the system where someone from your grantee organization, perhaps your fiscal office, is logging into IDIS, creating a voucher for eligible expenses, and then a second person is coming in and approving that voucher, again, for eligible expenses. So really want to focus that conversation about finances. As Nora has already stated, for a lot of communities, a lot of grantees, a lot of grants, that draw deadline for IDIS was April 30th, 2024. And that's for all of the communities that did not receive reallocated funds. So I think out of the 361 ESG CARES grants that were made across the country, 299 of those communities had that draw deadline of April 30th in 2024. For the remaining 61 communities, or 62 communities, sorry, you have an upcoming draw deadline of October 31st, 2024. So really now is the time for you all to be reviewing your finances, and we're going to get to that in a lot more in depth in a few slides, but reviewing your finances and ensuring that you get all of your draws, you create and have that second person approve all of those final expenses or for eligible expenses. All of those draws are done before October 31st, 2024. One final thing to mention, when communities have gone through this process of creating draws, mistakes have certainly happened, and we're going to talk about revising vouchers in a little bit. But one thing that we are starting to notice is that communities have gone through and sometimes returned funds back to HUD. You've even written out a check if it was a smaller amount, you've sent a wire transfer, you've sent money back to HUD. That's a very technical based process, and the IDIS manual actually does a fairly decent job of outlining all of those different steps with lots of screenshots. But in essence, when you return funds to your ESG CARES grant, you're not in that communication and that transmission memo saying these funds were returned for shelter, and then these funds were also returned for homelessness prevention. You're not getting down to that level of specificity when you're sending funds back. You're just saying the grant number, and specifically, be very, very clear about that grant number. This is our ESG CARES grant. It's got a W in it, and here's the numbers, and it's got a code, and you're returning things to the grant level. The next step of that is those funds are going to come back into IDIS to activity number 3. It doesn't matter if you're the state of Florida or the state of Alaska and everybody in between. All of those funds are going to go back to activity number 3 for each and every single grantee. It's on the grantee's job to then revise those return funds, they're a negative number, back to where they were originally drawn. So again, if you were returning funds for shelter, you would return that back to your shelter activity. Recipient at that level. If you were returning funds for a few different activities, you would just be revising that voucher more than once until you get every penny returned appropriately. So I wanted to put that out there because Michelle from the Partnership Center, who will be talking here in just a few seconds, and myself, we're starting to see some imbalances because we're seeing that folks are returning funds and they're not completing that very last step. In a few minutes when I'm not talking, I'll drop in a link to actually a documentation from the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Program, on returning funds. It is fantastic. And if you love screenshots, it's got lots of screenshots in there. And again, the IDIS manual for ESG also has plenty of information on returning funds. So if you just need a quick pick-me-up in the afternoon on reading, don't read this, but do read this if you have to return funds back into IDIS and make sure you're completing that process correctly. Next slide, please. So one of the things we really are starting to see is an imbalance at times between the activity components between IDIS and Sage. And so Michelle and I are going to spend a decent bit of time today talking about this. So not only do we need the total draws in IDIS to match the total expenditures reported in Sage, we also need those to now line up at the component level. So they're referred to as the component line items in Sage, and they're called activity categories in IDIS. And so there might be some nuanced differences. Like in Sage, there's going to be more than one for shelter. In IDIS, we lump, emergency shelter and temporary shelter. We put those all together as one line item as emergency shelter. So as you can see in here, the IDIS draws match between IDIS and what's reported as an expenditure in Sage. That matches. But for homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing, there's an inconsistency here. IDIS is saying one thing, Sage is saying another thing. And thankfully, shelter is matching up between the two systems. But now it's you as the grantee, the recipient, you need to be looking at that level of specificity and seeing, okay, do our draws made in IDIS match with what we are reporting in Sage? And if they don't, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. We're going to start to talk about how to fix each of those systems.
Thanks, Heidi. So we want to look at closing the report in Sage. If you have done your draws and you're finished with the money part, then you need to report everything that you've done in Sage. All the projects have to have a closeout date. They need to have that closeout date before you send out requests for bundles. If you are doing your last report and your closeout dates were all entered in the previous report because that's the quarter that it happened in, then Sage will not send out bundles, but you've just got to run through the steps. So run through each step and get to your financial form and then fill out whatever you need to fill out in finance. The closeout, there's a question in Sage that says, is this your final report? If you say yes to the final report, we're going to start doing the closeout with you. So the review will not be your normal review of that report. Then it's going to be a closeout review to make sure that Sage and IDIS are in balance. You sign that statement saying you're not expecting to make any more draws, and you submit the final report, and then HUD has to accept that report. If they reject the report and it goes back to you, you need to make the corrections on the rejection and turn that around as fast as you can. I just kind of want to point out that we're way overdue on when the last reports were required to be submitted. So though we're talking about this now, your final report, if you did not get reallocations, was due in July. So if you haven't gotten to that, you need to move forward on it. When HUD closes out in Sage and then it's marked closed, the CARES Act desk officer that you have that's been working with you will send you a closeout agreement, and you will need to fill that out. It's a one-page form, which 2 pages is not a big deal. You'll need to get that through whatever process you have, sign it, and then provide the following supportive documentation. They want your PR91. I know you think that they can all see your PR91, but everybody can't at HUD headquarters. They can't see into IDIS. So they need you to send a copy of your PR91. They need you to send a copy of your FAFATA report. If you don't know what that is, go to the website that's linked here and take a look at that. It has to do with subcontracts and reporting your subcontractors if you've subcontracted more than I believe it's $30,000. And then there's an SF 425 that's due. And that is the standard SF 425. It's on the HUD exchange. It's on all kinds of things. Here's your link to that one. Those are the forms. So there's no laundry list of forms. You've signed it and you've done most of your reporting in Sage or in IDIS. I just want to talk about what balanced means so that you're all on board. Emergency shelter and temporary shelter add together to be shelter in IDIS. So you had to split them in Sage. It wasn't an exercise in fertility or frugality. We are using that data for all of the research and all of the reporting that comes out of ESG-CV now, and has been coming out for a while and going to Congress. So it was important that those things were split up for that purpose. But in IDIS, we never split up IDIS to handle that. Homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing. Heidi and I have seen you messed that one up. This is shades of HPRP coming back and haunting us. We have seen you messing up where the draws are going. So one side, the program side, thinks it's going in prevention, and that's what they put in Sage. And the finance side thought it went in rapid rehousing, and so they drew it out of the rapid rehousing. Clearly, our systems in-house in our cities, counties, townships are not talking to each other internally as maybe you could or should, because that's happening more than it should have. And so we will work with you to fix that out, to straighten that out. Street outreach, HMIS, and admin are the other line items. So when we talk about balancing your components or balancing your activities, that's the list that we're talking about balancing. There's a bunch of other stuff that was dropped in on you that you could fund under ESG-CV that didn't really go anywhere, like cell phones. So though you drew cell phones out of some line item, HUD never exactly told you where to draw it from. So it is possible that you have a cell phone line that was drawn from shelter rather than from street outreach or from admin. And you've reported it in Sage like this. We can see then the discrepancies in those draws if they're in any of these categories: cell phones, CE, training, or vaccine. Those kind of discrepancies your CARES Act officer is able to see. They're able to see a form that looks just like this, and they will, if the difference is the same difference as the cost of the cell phone, they'll let it go then and let you go by. So that's the only time that this happens, is if you have a report that contained one of those items, and most of you did not. Back to Heidi.
So as Michelle just alluded to, we have a report in IDIS called the PR91 report. It's the ESG Financial Summary Report. It is going to be a report that you can run for any specific year. You can't get a cumulative total. If you run it for 5 years, it's going to split out every single year. But you certainly can and should run it for your ESG CARES grant. And when going through that report, the very first page of it is going to provide just the 6 activity categories as they're listed in IDIS. So admin, data collection, otherwise known as HMIS, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, street outreach, shelter. I think I got them all. And so it's going to say at the very, what the funded amount was for each of those activity categories. It's also going to provide you what the drawn amount is for each and every one of those categories. So that would be a really good piece of paper to have in front of you, and then log into Sage and then do that comparison as to what Michelle had just shown on the previous page or slide, sorry. And that way you can start to see, okay, does the available to draw amount, is this showing all of those pieces of information matching up? Does the funded amount match with what our internal records, our internal contract said that we were providing at that activity category? Does the drawn amount match up with what our expenses show and our expenditures show for that activity category? So you can go line by line by line and ensure that all of that information is accurate. If it's not accurate and you still are one of the 62 communities that have time to draw funds, now's the time to make the plan. Okay, we have a major discrepancy between what we're showing as drawn and what our internal financial records show as drawn. Let's talk to our finance department if that's the answer or the first step in that process. And let's start to get some clarity. Are we behind on drawing funds? Was additional documentation needed? Where are we in the process? Just giving you more information to have that conversation to move things forward until we get to that final grant balance of 0. If you're still with a final grant balance of greater than 0, even a penny, now is the time to look at that, make sure that all of the eligible expenses were drawn, and that way, you can hopefully get to that point where your final balance to draw is 0, because that would be amazing. And that means you have, fully committed, funded, drawn, expended all of your ESG Cares dollars, and that would be an incredible story to share. Next slide, please. Michelle, I think there is,
if you're
back to you.
Yeah, so if you're not balanced, we're going to talk to you just a bit about what do you do. So first you need to figure out where the error is. Did you make the mistake in Sage or did you make the mistake in IDIS? Quietly, you're going to want to hope you made it in Sage because it's a whole lot easier to fix than IDIS. But Heidi's going to help you if you have a mistake in IDIS. Once you figure out where it is, then you can fix it. To help you figure out where it is, if you go to reports, which is your, there's a report link in Sage, and you go to the recipient expenditure report, you select your community, you select all, you view it on the screen, you're going to get a report that is very long. There's a column for each quarter, and on the report, it will show you what you charged. You said you expensed that quarter and you reported in Sage, and what you drew from IDIS by the end of that quarter. So you should, it oftentimes helps you figure out the balance. It's clearly where you see if you've inverted a draw. So if you've drawn from HP and you should have drawn from RRH, you're going to see that on the report in the totals column, because they'll be just inverted amounts. Do the math. The report will download into an Excel spreadsheet so that you can move it up and down and all around. We're back to IDIS then, Heidi.
All right, so again, for the majority of grantees, if you are doing this final closeout analysis and looking through things, and the error is unfortunately in IDIS, where so the expenditures as they've been reported in Sage are correct, but the error is now in IDIS, you're past your IDIS draw deadline. So what do you need to do? Well, first and foremost, you can't revise any of your vouchers in IDIS on your own, because all of the grants that are past that April 30th draw deadline have been blocked in IDIS to prevent additional draws. And so once a grant is blocked, you are limited in what you can do. You can still complete activities, you can still update activity narrative descriptions, you can update things that are more narrative based, but you can't update finances. So that, again, that's just a preventative measure to ensure that additional funds aren't drawn past that draw deadline. And so at this point, you would need to submit ask a question, or an AAQ as it's shorthandedly called, to the IDIS question pool on the HUD Exchange. And so when you go through that process of submitting a question, one of the prompts will say, my question is related to, and you're going to want to pick IDIS from that drop-down menu. So that's the Integrated Disbursement and Information System. In that question, you're going to want to be very, very specific about what you're requesting. For our ESG CARES grant, we overdrew our emergency shelter activity by $50,000 for subrecipient awesome grantee name or subrecipient name, when really that should have been drawn from rapid rehousing or street outreach. And you're going to include the activity name as well as the activity number, any of the dollar amounts, certainly, and the subrecipient name. You need to give enough information that the IDIS programmers can go in and make a revision on your behalf. And so, we'll work with you. I manage the IDIS question pool on the HUD Exchange. We've got an incredible team over there. We'll work with you. We'll email you outside of the AAQ to make sure that we have all of the information needed to put that forward to the IDIS programmers, and then they will make those voucher revisions for you. It's not going to happen overnight. So I do want to say that to you all. When they are revising these vouchers, this is a one opportunity time thing. So we really need to make sure that those numbers are accurate, that they add up to the penny. If you're saying you're revising $50,000 and it's going 4 different ways, those 4 different ways need to add up to $50,000. So we'll do that fact finding with you as best as we can. But the more information that you can provide to us in that initial request will certainly be helpful. And again, the activity ID number, the activity name, the subrecipient name is very, very critical. And again, those dollar amounts. So that's for the grantees that had that April 30th, 2024 draw deadline. If you are one of the grantees that has an October 31st IDIS draw deadline, I would say first and foremost, start doing this analysis right now. If you are about to hit submit on your final voucher in IDIS, pause and do this financial analysis right now before you hit submit on that. You can only revise vouchers in IDIS if you have funds available to draw. So before you submit those final invoices, do this financial analysis. Look at Sage, look at IDIS. Are they lining up with once you make those final draws? And then if they are, that is fantastic. If they aren't, now is the opportunity and the time for you to, again, if Sage is correct and IDIS needs to be updated, to make some voucher revisions before you process your final draws in IDIS. And so when you are revising vouchers in IDIS, again, the biggest thing is you have to have funds available to draw, first and foremost. You can revise a draw from one subrecipient within that same activity. So if you are a state and you have 172 different subrecipients that you gave shelter funds to, and you need to revise from one to another within that shelter activity, as long as there's funds available to draw, you can certainly do that. If you need to revise from a subrecipient from shelter to street outreach, you can do that. So you can revise from within an activity, from one sub to another. You can revise from most activities to another activity type. The only exception being when everyone created their admin activity, it was given a very specific type of funding. It was given something called AD, short for admin funding. And so once something is funded with AD funding, it is siloed off from the rest of your funding. So that is a situation where if you you would be able to revise from one subrecipient to another within your admin activity, but you wouldn't be able to revise an admin voucher to say HMIS or HMIS to admin. So, you know, your HMIS, your homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, street outreach, shelter, they're over in one bucket of funding. Your admin is in a separate bucket of funding. So what we would again encourage you to do is, okay, look at that. We have a discrepancy in our admin. However, we are waiting to draw more admin. Let's make that whole with that next draw. Let's make sure, you know, okay, if we needed to make this revision, let's do that revision. And now we can make that correct on our next admin draw. So again, that's why this is really, really important. If you have not drawn all your funds yet, you're coming closer to that October 31st deadline, do this financial analysis now. Make sure there's harmony between Sage and IDIS, and have a plan to move forward. Once you draw all of your funds, it becomes a much more complicated issue, and we would certainly want you to take care of this before it gets to that more complicated issue. Next slide, please. And here are some links to resources. Happy to pop them in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. But the first and foremost is a webinar that was done pretty early on during COVID, and it goes through the entire process for setting up all of your draws and how to create vouchers for the ESG Cares Grant program. The second webinar is a little bit older. I think it's from 2016, and it goes through specifically how to revise vouchers in IDIS. The third resource is using the IDIS online, otherwise just IDIS for ESG. We should hopefully have a new version of that document coming soon, but again, all of the pertinent information for the CARES grant is certainly in there. And then finally, didn't talk about the mechanics of completing fiscal year 2020 activities in IDIS, but that resource is certainly there. And I do apologize if you listen to any of those webinars, you're going to be hearing a lot of me, and I apologize in advance for that. Next slide, please.
So if you have found that you've made your mistake in Sage, you can correct that yourself. You don't need us to do it for you. You will use the current report that you're working on, which should be your final report. You will use that report's financial information form, and in the this quarter column, you will make an adjustment so that the third column over, the total current and previous amount, which is the cumulative amount that you've drawn in that activity, is in balance. You can put a negative number into Sage. Sage is going to ask you, are you sure you wanted a negative number? When you say yes, it's going to take it. So you can make your adjustment either way you need to in Sage. Once you have everything in balance, then on that closeout form itself, it's going to ask you, is this the final report? When you say yes, you've triggered the closeout process for HUD, for the CARES Act team to know to send you the forms and that kind of stuff. It is going to tell you that your IDIS total draw balances with your Sage. It's not looking at the line items. As honestly, we thought if the totals matched, the line items would match, but we've learned we were wrong. So it's there. It will not let you go without it balancing. Karen's going to talk at the end about what if you have a small, tiny balance left. And as she finishes that, I'll tell you what to do with that in Sage. And then you'll sign the closeout saying that you've made your final draw. If you're the program person, it would be really, really helpful to tell your finance people that you've signed a statement saying you have it, the draws are done and they've made all the draws, because it's been particularly interesting how many people drew after signing saying we're done. So just so you know.
I think it's back to me for a little bit of wrap up and then review, and more importantly, probably placing in the chat of some additional resources about ESG-CV Closeout. So just thank Heidi and Michelle for that great, like really specific content. If you're feeling like this was a foreign language, that's okay. It probably just means this isn't the piece of ESG-CV that you work on, but someone is. So it might be a great way to use this webinar as a vehicle to come together to make sure that you, like Michelle said, like your financial and your IDIS people and your program people, that you all are all having the same conversation, speaking the same, having the same symphony, I believe is the analogy that Heidi used. So we can kind of continue that metaphor going forward. So as a reminder, closeout is a process. It's not just a one and done thing. There are lots of steps. It happens when you're done spending money, you're done serving clients, and you've issued all your final payments and drawn all your funds from IDIS. There's also because there's another system that we haven't really mentioned, the Homeless Management Information System, where you're entering in data about the people who you've been working with and housing and doing all that great work with. You also, there's the requirement to make sure that you've got all your HMIS data updated. Another piece of closeout that's talked about more in the big webinar from last year is making sure that any monitoring findings, if you were monitored by HUD, make sure that any of your findings were closed, or if you happen to be, this program was audited and you had any findings from your audit, that those are all closed. And then, like Michelle referenced, make sure all the reporting requirements are done. So that's the Sage reporting, that's the FFATA reporting, and then also the SF424, your final SF424 is submitted. And again, more information on that can be found in the prequel, I guess, to this webinar, where we really walked through all the requirements. And we're going to put some of those links in the chat. These are all the other resources that we have, the recording from the previous webinar. There's a checklist of some ESG-CV Closeout to-do lists, which is a little bit more of the content that we've talked about in a checklist format, so you can either tell if you've done it or if it needs to be done. You can also use that tool as part of that conversation for your program, financial, IDIS people to all come together and just make sure that you are all coordinating in closing out your ESG-CV. And then there's another resource about the ESG closeout process in Sage. All kinds of great resources about ESG-CV were created. They're on the ESG-CV HUD Exchange. Those are still there, so you still have access to those. You can submit questions through Ask a Question. And then if you also want to talk to someone, maybe get a little bit more of some questions answered through regional technical assistance, you can reach out to your HUD regional technical assistance provider. So we'll put all those links in after, as we're doing the Q&A, I will put those in, although it looks like actually someone's doing that as I'm speaking, telepathically doing that. So that's amazing. Now, time for questions. Karen, I know there was one that already had come through the chat about the small balance. Do you want to chat about that one?
Yeah. First, thank you, ladies. This was great. Thank you guys for the questions that you've put into the chat already. We're going to try to go through some of them, and please let them, we have, I think, another 40 minutes scheduled for this, so we have plenty of time to answer questions. But there was one question that was really good about a recipient wrote in that they have about a 20-cent balance. And are they going to have to ask for a waiver, or what are they going to need to do? And so the quick answer is we are not going to spend anybody's time, a lot of time, trying to figure out where 20 cents. It's not worth any of our time. Staff here, your staff, you all. I will say, though, that this program, as you guys know, this was unprecedented. This was historical. The ESG has never and probably never will ever see $4 billion again. So from the minute this money went out the door, quite frankly, the auditors and the inspector general have been all over us, asking us, looking at how it was implemented, how it's being closed out, how it's this. So we have a process in place in order to address audits that are ongoing and future audits that require the desk officer here in SNAPS, when they see that final QPR and it shows an unbalance, they are required to send an email and note it in Sage and say, your financials do not balance, please, take a look. And then they are also following up with an email saying, your financials do not balance. Please take a look at this. Now they're doing that for everybody because that's part of our process, again, and to be able to kind of defend like how we're approaching closing out all of these grants at the end of this, the grant period. We've already had a lot of people come back and say, look, they looked, they got it, they got everything fixed. They still got $1.50. They've got 20 cents. They've got $5, minimal amounts of money. And we are approving and telling the desk officers, go ahead and make a note in Sage, that this is fine to approve. The discrepancy is minimal. You don't have to ask us for a waiver or anything like that. We're not going to, create major headaches over, pennies and cents and even a couple of dollars. So hopefully that allays some of the anxiety, because I'm not a numbers person. I don't do accounting. And that makes me nervous trying to figure out, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, where's 20 cents? We're not going to ask you to do that. The other thing that Michelle, I think, brought up and was another question that was asked about. So you have this 20 cents, let's say, or $5, and you're done. You've done all the forms. You've done the PR 91. You get the closeout agreement from the ESG CARES Act desk officer. You do that. Everything's done, but you still got this $5 sitting in your account, right? You don't have to do anything with that. We are going to come later this fall, we're going to come through and we're going to recapture all the money that's sitting in IDIS that hasn't been drawn down. So you don't have to fill out a form, tell us, oh, recapture the $5, HUD. Now, administratively, we cannot close out your grant until we've recaptured that money. But as far as you all are concerned, once you've completed all of the steps that these ladies outlined and, signed the closeout agreement, sent it back to us with the 425 and all of that, you're done. We'll follow up if we need anything else from you, but you're done. We will recapture those funds, like I said, later this fall, and then we go into the system and we actually enter a code and it administratively closes your grant and your grant is closed. So you don't have to do anything with those balances, just kind of leave them be and we come through and we recapture. I think this might be the only questions that I had or that I had seen.
Can I just add, Karen, that if you're out of balance like that with that 20 cents and you can't get Sage closed because of that, you can't get the closeout to work because Sage will not let you close out if you're not balanced. I have a way to put in the kind of figure that you're off on. So if you put an AAQ into the Sage desk, we can put your discrepancy figure into the financial form for you and let it close. So don't let that 20 cents thing make you crazy. Just put the AAQ in and ask us to add it into Sage, and we will.
Thanks, Michelle. Anything else that I'm missing? I lost my chat box for a minute here. Wait, see.
Karen, this is Sharon. I just wanted to say, in terms of folks who have large balances remaining that were uncommitted or undrawn, they can close out in Sage, but we are asking them to wait to do those final steps until we've recaptured the funds. Is that correct? We're asking them to wait to do the forms and the closeout agreement. That's what we've been doing right now.
Okay. I mean, if that's what we've been telling people, I won't change that here on this call. I mean, I think technically, like, they could submit their 425. I mean, nothing else can happen on the financial side of things. It's not like they can come back in and draw or anything. The money's just going to sit there until we recapture it. So technically, I mean, they could finish everything administratively on their end. But if we want to kind of update our messaging, you know, we can talk about that with the team. But yeah.
Great, but there's nothing they need to do for us. We will recapture the funds.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
If you're the person from Indiana writing that question, if you put that into the Sage desk, I'll work that through with you individually.
Thanks, Michelle.
Michelle, I see one in the chat too about Sage. I'm just going to read it. When we submit the Sage report and receive the accepted email from HUD, does that mean the report has been reviewed and approved by HUD?
Yes.
Super. I love a good yes/no question.
It was easy.
answer.
And there was a question. I think one of the very first questions we got when we started was about the closeout forms. There was a link that's going to be in the deck. There's a link that was posted in the chat about a kind of a grant closeout to-do list that goes over, again, everything that everybody's, you know, spoken of today. That is not the form. We actually do not have publicly posted. We do not have the grant closeout agreement, sorry. We don't have that publicly posted. What we've been doing is the ESG CARES Act desk officers have been sending that form out to recipients to complete. One thing that is important just for folks to realize or to know, so that form is not, we send it out and we ask that folks complete it. It is not a required form basically because it has not been through OMB approval. It does not have an OMB number, so we cannot require you to complete that form. We have a timeline from when grants close, when their end date to when they are supposed to be closed out administratively, meaning recaptured and administratively closed out. So we have a timeline at HUD that we're working on. And so by law, we can go in and start closing out your grant even without that signed form. I'm not saying that to say you shouldn't do it. It's just better for your records, for our records, to get that signed form back from you. But I just also want you to know that, and it does say this on the form and in the guidance, that if after 30 days, you know, we haven't heard from you, we by law can go in and start the closeout process on your grant. Now, chances are we're going to follow up with you if you have questions. If somebody's out sick and you can't get the form signed, just let your CARES Act desk officer know. We're not tracking all these. I'll be honest. You know, we are not tracking every single and on day 31 starting closeout. There's just a lot of confusion sometimes with those forms. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware that you'll get that form. We will work with you to get it completed. Your CARES Act desk officer can answer questions. You can always put questions in the AAQ as well. But that form is not something that we post publicly because it's never been it doesn't have an OMB number, and you know, it's more of an internal record keeping document for us. Let's see if we've got. Anybody see any other questions?
Not a question, but maybe just if you feel like a little bit like not quite sure where you are and you're going to go back to your finance and your program people, I think a good next step, and maybe Karen, you can confirm this, is really reach out to your desk officer and just, you know, once you feel like you know where you are and you've come to that kind of common understanding with your program, your finance, and your IDIS people, great time to have a conversation with your ESG-CV desk officer to review, to make sure that you're all on the same page, and then talk through next steps and timing, and just have that in a very specific way after you've looked at the full picture of where you are with your ESG-CV grant.
Thanks. I see a question, is there technical assistance at this point for Sage noncompliance remediation as part of the closeout process? So the CARES Act desk officers have been doing a lot of outreach over the last probably 6 to 9 months to a lot of recipients who are behind with their Sage QPR report, their reporting for CARES Act. So if by chance you have not been contacted by a desk officer and you are behind in getting your reports done, I would suggest reach out to your desk officer first and foremost. You can absolutely put a question in the AAQ on the Sage portion of it. Michelle and her staff will see that question. We absolutely have technical assistance. In fact, we are actively working with communities and getting groups of people on the phone with Michelle to look at Sage to see what we need to do to get folks caught up, why reports have been rejected. It's kind of like a ugly, vicious cycle. You submit one back in, Q12 and it gets rejected. And then you kind of like, you're not sure what the problem is. And so you keep submitting and they keep getting rejected. And so we can absolutely help you work through all of that and get you caught up. So definitely reach out to your CARES Act desk officer or put a question in the AAQ.
There is not a closeout checklist in Sage for finance. So we are assuming that your financial people have looked at the financial information form in Sage with you and have approved that. There's no separate finance checklist.
So I see the question here, how can HUD recapture funds if we have a pending draw? So we recapture months after the draw deadline has passed. So I don't know, and I'm not the IDIS expert, but I don't know that there'd ever be an instance where we'd be going your draw pending, unless it's something that's just somehow hung up from months ago. But I mean, yeah, I mean, we're talking about, we're going to go in November or December and recapture funds. The draw deadline was April and the grants are blocked now. So you can't go in and draw. And again, that's, so I'm not sure, I might be misunderstanding the question, but we wouldn't be recapturing with anybody with a pending draw sitting there.
Right. Karen, the longest a draw can actually be open in IDIS is 90 days. And so if the draw deadline was in April and HUD is not going to recapture until November and December, that's well past 90 days. And again, as Karen said, that those grants are already blocked. But just for everyone's education, that's why it takes 2 people to create a voucher in IDIS. The first person creates, the second person completes. So, you need that person to create, then approve, then it moves to completion. We typically don't see pending vouchers in IDIS, but if you leave a draw open for 90 days, IDIS will cancel it automatically on the 91st day. It assumes, probably correctly, that draw was made in error. If that money hasn't come into your account in 90 days, it's chances are you forgot to have a second person approve that draw in IDIS.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions? I think we've hit everything in the chat, unless I missed something. All right. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up a little bit early. Thank you, everybody who joined. Thank you, Heidi, Nora, Michelle, and Sharon. Again, please, this is, as I think it was Heidi, maybe it was Nora that said, this is a process. And we are here to help you. We are here to answer any questions that you guys have. There are a lot of moving parts here, a lot of deadlines, a lot of systems to report in, and we get that. So don't panic. If you're behind in something, reach out to your desk officer, put an AAQ in, do both. That's okay. It's actually a pretty small team, and we all work together and kind of discuss all of this internally. So it does not hurt to do both. But just let us know where we can help you all as we're wrapping down the CARES Act allocation that you all receive. So again, thank you to the presenters. Thank you to everybody that joined, and have a good rest of your day, everyone.